The Polaris submarine is unique in power and precision, world-ranging, nuclear-propelled, undetectable. Its 16 warheads combine the might of all the explosives of World War II. The Polaris missile is triggered to hurl the warhead 1,200 miles to whatever target the military mind in its wisdom selects. There are those that hold that Polaris is immoral and suicidal, who believe that the power of human love is a match for the power of missiles. In the summer of 1960, the CNVA, Committee for Nonviolent Action, selected Polaris as its target. Bill Henry, Dick Zink, Margaret Windus, and Brad Little are of this small, vigorous, pacifist group which initiates and carries through specific dramatic acts up to and including civil disobedience. CNVA's participants in Polaris Action come as peace walkers and as peace rowers. Their aim was to board the Polaris subs in living protest against the mechanisms of massive annihilation. Supporting actions included appeals to the workmen who manufactured the nuclear subs. The workers gave the pacifists the welcome that might have been expected. The Electric Boat Division of the General Dynamics Corporation, where the submarines are made and launched, lies on the river called the Thames, across from New London, Connecticut, where the CNVA set up its headquarters. Against Polaris, the pacifists pitted their own fleet, propelled by the muscles of rowers or the warm July wind, loaded with their bodies, which desired to go on living, and equipped with a barely tapped, incalculable power of nonviolence. CNVA's work was carried on by a shifting corps of volunteers, men and women, old persons and the very young, ministers, atheists, Negro and white, ex-servicemen and conscientious objectors. Each gave what he could afford. Each embraced a risk to the degree his conscience demanded or his circumstances allowed. The Navy and local authorities, fully alerted by the pacifists before each demonstration, frustrated the attempts to board the nuclear subs and refused to put the civil disobeyers under arrest. Warships under challenge are better off in the dark and secrecy of a silent, untempted press. At the summer's end, the civil disobedience planned to board not a sub, but a General Dynamics restricted area floating dry dock, where the submarine George Washington was being checked and inspected. A supporting land vigil was held at the gates of the shipyard. The pacifists rowed across the river. Were pledged to try their utmost to gain the dock, to remain there as witnesses for peace as long as humanly possible. They would resist removal by falling limp in dead weight. There are many ways to work for peace. For these followers of Mohandas Gandhi and Henry David Thoreau, this insistence of physical presence under the propellered stern of the nuclear submarine was the most direct and pure way. It was their expression of their necessity to contrast the human creature with the death machine, and thus alert all people to protest, to resist, to avert the imminent peril. The civil disobedience fulfilled their task with open hearts, with inner dignity, and without loss of sympathy for the guards, whose job it was to repel and eject them. A new atmosphere now prevailed. The pacifists had proven their sincerity and demonstrated the degree of their dedication. In this town, which depends on Polaris for its very livelihood, men were not to be won over in a summer, but the workmen read and listened to the pacifists' arguments, and argued back with keen interest and the beginnings of friendship. But not one pacifist had yet been aboard one nuclear submarine. Summer was over, the river wind growing cold. The Polaris subs lay half submerged, their tail fins thrusting up from the water. Soon they would be moved to winter quarters, and the opportunity gone for that year. Many of the demonstrators no longer hoped to achieve a boarding. October, November. The CNVA made new attempts, and at last they succeeded. That fall, 3 Polaris subs were boarded by 4 men in their 20s or teens. Bill Henry and Ed Leides rowed to the main deck of the Patrick Henry. The Ethan Allen was launched. Swimmers dove into the restricted river and were pursued through the icy cold waters. Don Martin struggled onto the deck of the Ethan Allen in a protest boarding of the gaily decorated newly born vessel of war. Dick Zink climbed up the tail fin of the partly submerged George Washington, a lone exponent of peace, uncaptured for 15 minutes on the Navy's deadliest weapon. Countdown. Will there be time to warn men, to dissuade them from blowing up the world? The nonviolent challenge to violence goes on. The success of the boardings made news around the world. The Navy arrested 9 of the pacifists, among them Dick Zink, Bill Henry, and Don Martin. Brad Little and Margaret Windus have gone on to new action projects. But Polaris Action is still there, in New London, and will stay.